All right, welcome to week 3. In this tutorial we're going to cover how to add lights and render this out. So here's my sort of final maze here. Here's in shaded solid mode, and you can see I've added all my materials. And I have a light group here already set up, and I'm going to click on the second clapper, these 4 clappers up here, which is the render clapper, and just show you what an image will look like at the default settings with these light sets. And then I will actually go through the process of how to create a light setting. So here we go. And it looks like the resolution's at 960 by 540. So it's kind of low res right now. The default, I believe, if we click on the little gear icon, these 4 clappers here shows the render settings. And if we scroll down here, you can see it's HD 540. In the beginning, leave it at that because it might take you longer to render, and then we'll up the resolution for our final renders, okay? But what I want to share with you is if I turn off the light group here by just turning on off visibility here real quick and do another render, I'll go ahead and do it. You'll see basically it's black. And this is what would happen if you actually clicked on the second clapper here on your own without anything in the scene, no lights. We need to add lights. So let's do that. So let's go to the Arnold tab here, this Arnold shelf tab. You can see these little shelves. And you can add a light in here, and the one we're going to add in here is actually, before we click on these lights, let's add a directional light, just so we have like a sunlight kind of thing, and that's not in this group here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the create menu here and go down to lights and go down to directional light. Okay, so again, I'll go through that same process again. Click on create, go to lights, and then choose directional light. And then it'll come in the scene probably kind of small or big depending on your scene. But you can see it here in the outliner. And if you don't have your outliner up, remember you just click on that little icon at the bottom there. And I'm going to hit the R key to scale it up. I'm going to grab this little middle cube here and start scaling up. And the way the directional light works, it's an infinite light. Imagine it like a sun light. And it doesn't matter which direction it's at, essentially, or where it's placed. Like if I move it forward here, and the light direction, you can see where the arrow is, so it's going from left to right here. This is infinite, so it doesn't matter if I pull it off here, the light's still going to affect this scene here. So if I click on a render tab now, you'll start to see some light in the scene. It'll be kind of dark because it's such an extreme angle here, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate it just by hitting E again, and I'm going to click on, or sorry, E, I use R for scale. This is the scale tool, here's the rotation tool. I'm going to click on the red arrow and kind of drag it downwards so I get kind of like a sunlight direction kind of thing going on there. And now let's click on that second clapper and let's see what happens here to the render. So we're starting to get a better render overall, but it's still kind of dark. You can definitely adjust the settings for this directional light, and they're in the what's known as the attribute editor. All things in Maya have what are known as attributes, and it's this bottom tab on the far right here. You can click on it. It's the third icon up here on the top, and it's based on whatever you have selected. So if I select an object, you can see I have cube here selected. Here I have the light selected, and so now all the attributes of this have basically appeared. So there's some things you can change here. But before we do that, let's add a light to our global light to our whole scene. And so the one I want to add is this little one with the sun on here. And again, this is the Arnold shelf. So if you're in another shelf, click on the Arnold shelf and then hover over that little sun guy and then click on it. And this will be a physical sky in the scene here, okay? And typically that will give you a lot more light. So if I click on the second clapper now, we should see a nice bit of light now, just with the default settings. Now I'm going to show you how to adjust some settings if you need to, and then we'll do the final render essentially. Alright, so let's see here. Now rendering will take more time based upon what kind of materials you have. I have a lot of copper and reflective materials here, so it's taking a little bit longer. You can see here at the bottom it kind of tells you the sampling and the actual time. It took 21 seconds to render that out. For the larger renders, it will take a little bit longer to render out. The lighting here looks alright. But if I did want to change it, if I click on the directional light here, you have an intensity value of 1. So I could drop that to say like 0.5 0.5, which would be like half the intensity, right? And then before I click on another render, I'm going to actually save this render. By click on this little icon here, it's this little blue rectangle around this little picture frame. If you click on that, it saves a snapshot of the previous render. And then we'll click the clapper here in the render view, which is the same thing as clicking on the same clapper here. And then you can basically, see a before and after kind of in the scene, right? So I'll be able to compare the two pictures based upon the difference in the lighting. So I can now move it, and you can kind of see how it got a little bit darker. It's going from bright there to a little bit darker there. And so if you need to adjust it further, you could keep doing that. If the global light is too bright, and that's the sky dome, you can click on the sky dome, and you can do the same thing here. You can drop the exposure. So right now it's set to 0, but if we type in a minus like 0.5, right? And I'm not going to do the entire render this time. This time I'm going to do a region, and the way you do regions, because it takes a long time. If you just drag over an area, you can see I've created a rectangle here, and then click the second little clapper here, and that will just render out that one little area. Just a little faster preview because it'll just show me what it'll be like in this one little area. And you can see here how it's getting a little bit darker, but if we go, negative, let's do negative 2, for example, which is quite a bit darker. You should see a more drastic, here you can see a more drastic change in the background, right? I actually think it was fine at 0. So I'm going to leave it at its correct exposure, which is the 1 for intensity, exposure 0. You can also adjust the intensity, which is another value you can adjust. So if we minus that 0.5, we get a similar effect where it's dropping down in the intensity. I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 1. And pretty much, I think the global settings are pretty good, except if we scroll down here towards the bottom, I believe, let's see. Yeah, here is samples under exposure. It's set to 1. One thing we can do to improve the lighting conditions and the overall sampling is add more samples. So it'll take longer to render, but I'm going to add 3 in there. And then I'm going to click on the directional light and kind of do the same thing. For the directional light, I believe it's in the shadow area. Yeah, so in here we have these values here we can change under ray trace for the shadow, and I'm just going to increase the quality. So right now the light angle is set to 0. So if I set that to a value of say like 5, for example, and the shadow raise to 5, and let's go ahead and add the ray depth to 5. This will improve the overall quality of the shadows and the scene here. So now that I've adjusted the lighting pretty good, again the directional light, we've changed those 3 little icons under ray trace. If this is collapsed, just open it up by clicking a little arrow. Change those values. And then the sky dome light, again, just scroll down till you see samples under exposure. There's another samples down here, it's called volume samples. That one we don't have to adjust, it's just this one here. And then now let's go ahead and do a full render by clicking on the far left icon here and see what it would do in terms of lighting. What's going to happen is it's definitely going to take a little longer to render, and we'll see that in just a sec here. So you'll see that the time passes a little bit longer, and depending on how powerful your machine is, if you don't have a good graphics card or enough RAM, memory, or you just have a ton of geometry in your scene, it can still take a long time. I have a pretty beastie machine, and it's still taking a long time. So this took 23 seconds, and if you look back at the previous renders here, it was 21, so it only upped up a couple of seconds for that higher res for the lighting. But now we have to up the resolution. This is where we're going to see a great deal more in terms of resolution. So I'm going to click on this 4th clapper here, which has a little gear icon. It's also in here in the render view, so you can click on that guy too. And then it opens up the render settings here. And what I want to do in here in the render settings is change, if I scroll down here under the common tab, scroll down here and change the width and the height. So if you remember from our project, if we look at it, you're supposed to render out 2048 by 1024, 3 or more renders, right? After you add the primitives and the lighting and the materials, right? So 248 by 1024. So we're going to put for the width 2048 It's also known as a 2K. If it was square, it'd be 2K render, but we're going to go to half for the height, 1024. So we get more of that kind of boxier frame. Once you add that, you can click on either one to kind of escape out. And then, so now our render settings set up right. Now, we could increase the quality of the render, and this is something that will, under Arnold Render here, it's these samples. I'm going to leave it at the default just to see what the render looks like, but you can increase some of these numbers, but it will increase how long it takes to render, quite a bit in fact. Just by upping like one number on these, sometimes we'll add like a couple minutes to several minutes of render time. So let's leave it at the default to see how long it takes. And now, before I actually render, what I want to do is notice this preview here doesn't tell me like the full frame of where it is. Like if I'm zoomed out here or zoomed in here, we don't know where is the renderable area here in our scene. So these little icons here under the show menu here, there's a couple little icons here. And if you click on this first one, this one here, if you hover over it, it is the resolution gate. And the next one is gives you the resolution gate, I'm sorry. And this one gives you like it's a, I forget what it's called. It's like the motion gate or something like that. I think it reveals itself over here when I hover over it. Usually it reveals it. For some reason it's not doing that. There's usually a smart tip guide, but it's basically this icon, it looks like a film strip there. And then you want to click on the resolution gate. Resolution gate, you'll see it 2048 by 1024. And now I can close this little guy out, the render settings. And this is the renderable area essentially. So now I can rotate my scene here and find a cool angle that I want. Like maybe I do want some where it's zoomed in, but I think for the first setting maybe I'll have the whole scene here for the first render here. And then I'm going to click on that second clapper to render this out. And so once I do that, you'll start to see it render, and it will take a while to do this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause while it's rendering, but you can start to see it start to render here. And I'll come back in just a sec. All right, you can see here at the bottom it took 42 seconds to render, so it was like double the amount of time. And it's definitely a higher res image. If I actually use the middle mouse just to roll in the image, you can see it's better detail. It's definitely not the best render. I could definitely go higher, but this is totally acceptable for the project. I do want to point out this little on and off button here. What this is this is a special gamma preview of light. It's a corrected light in the scene here. And so you want to make sure, typically you leave that on, and you could have it off and you would save out that version, but then you would have to adjust the lighting. So I like this version here. So I'm going to show you how to save this out. So we're not done yet. As we render it, we need to still save it. So in this render view window, you want to go File and Save Image. And then it will, as long as you've been working in your projects, it'll default to the Maze project in the Images folder. If for some reason you're not in there, navigate to that folder, or you can save the image on a desktop or something. But typically it's in your Images folder in your project. And what you want to do here is you have the option on the right here of Raw Image and Color Managed Image. And so you want to check that box that is Color Managed. If for some reason this is condensed like this, just make sure you click in here and pull out, and make sure you have that Color Managed. That will add the On button and get the full image here. At the bottom here, it has this OpenEXR format, which isn't a bad format, but it's a format that you could open up in Photoshop. But for your average viewer, you basically want to choose a JPEG. So you want to click in here and go down. You could choose a TIFF file or a JPEG file. TIFF was okay, and you could save it out here. If we re-rendered this out in the render settings, I didn't choose the JPEG option. I should have done that. We could get that, but a TIFF you'll be able to open up in like Photoshop, and that will be fine too. To be honest though, if you want to just send it to me, you can choose the OpenEXR format and email that to me, and that would be fine also. But I will show you real quick how you would do that if you were rendering it out in here. If you click on the render settings again, in here in the Common tab, this is where you'd scroll down, let's see, right here where it says Image Format EXR. In here you can choose, typically JPEG is an option here. And then you'd be able to render it out and save it that way. So under the File, Save Image, click in here, and JPEG is not an option here, it doesn't look like. Oh, it is. If I scroll down further and up, There we go. Now I've got JPEG in here, so I don't have to re-render it. I can go to JPEG, and I'm going to call this, it looks like I have a bunch of maze images already in here. So I'll just call it AAA, and then maze, actually I don't have to have that cap, maze. And then I'm going to add a 1 after it, right? And again, I'm going to make sure it's the color managed image. You could save out one of each just to see what it looks like, but you want to make sure not to collapse the render view if you do that. So now I can hit save, and I will have that image in my folder. So if I go into my documents in my Maya projects folder in the maze project, in the images, I will have that image here, and here it is here, and I can double click on it and you can see the image. Now if I do want to save out the other version, right, the other one, I don't have to turn this off. I can just go File, Save Image, and then here choose Raw Image, right? And I'll click on this and then just change the 1 to a 2 here and keep the .jpeg. Make sure you have that on there. The extension is extremely important. And then save that out. And then now you can see I have the darker uncorrected color corrected version. You can see some banding that's happening here, some artifacts. Again, there's definitely more settings we could explore, but for just render example, this is fine for this project. Now, then you're going to want to add a couple more renders. So what you're going to want to do is maybe choose something zoomed in. Like I think it'd be kind of cool to have something zoomed in here. Like this is kind of a cool scene. Maybe something like that. It's a good composition. Maybe pull out just a little bit. Basically however much you want here. Play around with it in the scene. And then basically all you do is click on the clapper again. And then render it out. And again, it'll take a little bit of time, so I'll go ahead and pause. So you can see this took a lot longer for the render time. It was 3 minutes 34 seconds versus the was it 42 seconds was the last render. So and the very low res was 21 seconds. So once you zoom in, you're going to definitely get more reflections depending on what kind of material. I have a lot of copper and other reflective type materials here, so they're going to definitely cause a longer render time. But again, I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save Image. Since I did name the other one 2, I will name this one 3, making sure I again have that .jpeg extension here. And I'm not going to render a raw image, I'm just going to render the color managed image and click Save. And then take a look at that real quick, and here it is. And so these are the images that you would submit for the final project, but basically that's it. You need to have at least three images. I believe it says 3 or more. Yeah, 3 or more renders. So if you feel like adding a few more renders, you can go ahead and do that and upload it to the site. Until then, this concludes the Maze project. I hope you had fun. Until next time.